everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Coding well, and today we're doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which sees the brand new MCU film, The Marvels, projected to have, on paper, the worst ever opening for an MCU movie. Specifically looking here at the domestic box office. This is something that I've been talking about on several streams, both on my channel and elsewhere. But right now, the numbers are coming in, and even the mainstream media, even the box office shill media, can't hide the fact that this film is not doing well in the early numbers, is not doing well in the tracking, in the pre-sales, and going into this weekend, at least according to people like Tony and Nance over at Deadline, this film was tracking along the same lines as The Flash, and we all know how that film ended up being a massive flop for DC, for Warner Brothers, and it's looking like The Marvels is going to be yet another massive flop, massive disappointment for Disney and for the MCU. So we'll go ahead and talk about that, and also talk about what some other numbers are for this weekend. Before we go any further, please make sure you smash that like button, a lot of the phone, I see, smash the rumble button as well, and also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with the bell notification on. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So first, let's go over to Box Office Pro for a moment, because Box Office Pro has been very interesting when it comes to tracking films, right? It was one of the few sites that actually projected days in advance, long before the Thursday numbers came out, that the Barbie film over the summer was going to be as big of a hit as it ended up being for its opening weekend. And it has been, basically hit and miss across the board. And the reason why is because whereas, the so-called industry standard, right, the so-called industry experts are out there making their projections based off of certain things, Box Office Pro does something similar, but then they also kind of throw into the mix social media presence and other factors like that. And so for them right now, they are projecting that The Marvels is only going to make $42.2 million. Now, just as a frame of reference, even when you don't adjust the numbers for inflation, if you go back to the 2008 The Incredible Hulk film, which on paper is one of the worst performing of the entire MCU franchise, right? It just comparison to all of the plethora of other films that have come out in the entire history of the MCU, this film falls even below that number. And again, that is the unadjusted totals. When you actually look at the average or what the projected ticket sales are for this movie, we're talking about it being roughly around $3 to $4 million tickets less than films like The Hulk, and even films like Ant-Man from 2015, where when you look at The Incredible Hulk, when you look at the 2015 Ant-Man film, those are the smallest films for the MCU. And in fact, The Incredible Hulk was the only box office flop, according to the numbers that we had available to us, and then according to the budgets for the movie. It was the only flop in the MCU up until, of course, the COVID times and the COVID era, where we start to see that a flop and flops happening in the MCU are much more common, especially over the last year or two. It's looking like The Marvels, though, might end up being one of the biggest flops in the history of the MCU, and it all comes down to that opening weekend. Again, only $42.2 million is the domestic opening, is what's being currently projected. That is quite abysmal. We'll give you some examples. We'll give you some comparisons to give you kind of a mindset as to why it's as bad as it is. But for right now, their range is that the film is only going to make between $35 and $49 million. Now, going into this even just a few weeks ago, the projections were that this film was supposed to be getting upwards of $75-85 million domestic. Well, obviously, those so-called experts have changed their tune quite a bit. But the fact that Box Office Pro is having a pretty, bold prediction here, I think it's going to be interesting to see exactly where this film ultimately falls domestically. Now, going over to Nance and Tony over at Deadline, for them, they're also seeing not very good numbers. For them, they're looking at the global box office as only being $140 million in its opening. And though that's not the worst opening that we've ever seen in the history of film, it is also not a very strong one either. It goes on. Here's something we don't see often. Opening projections plummeting for a Marvel Studios movie. It's become a lot more common recently, though, Tony. Its latest sequel to 2019's Captain Marvel, The Marvels, which is also an extension of the Disney Plus series WandaVision Miss Marvel, of which no one watched, has seen its weekend forecast collapse from 75 to 80 million 3 weeks ago to around 60 million stateside. Some tracking services, such as Quorum, have lowered their estimates to 50 million. Now, what's interesting is that they actually go on a little bit further down here to say that yikes. The worry is that if the previews, which start at 3 p.m. Thursday, come in around 6 million, the Marvels weekend would crater to 40 plus million. So even they are saying right now the range is somewhere between 40 and 60 million dollars. And so really not all that far off from the number that we're seeing here. Of course, Box Office Pro has the max number a lot lower than that $60 million, but still, This movie, even if this film was to do the best case scenario, right? Even if this film was to somehow, some way pull off an absolute miracle, I have actually the projected ticket sales here. And you all know I like to do charts here over at OMB Reviews. And so if you go and again compare these numbers here to the entire history of the MCU, we go back once again to films like Iron Man and Incredible Hulk, right? The first films of the franchise. Incredible Hulk, again, on paper, a box office flop. Looking at the overall ticket sale estimates, guess what? Estimated to have sold around 7.7 million tickets in its opening weekend. Thor in 2011, around 8.2 million tickets. Ant-Man 2015, around 6.7 million tickets. Now, obviously, you can see there are several films that I've not yet been able to plug in because my time is crazy. I got kids, man, and work and everything else, but still, I was able to put in the films that have, again, on paper, been the lowest openings ever in their history. So the fact that you have a film like Ant-Man at 6.7 million tickets, and then even a film like Ant-Man Quantumania, remember that film was also a massive flop and disappointment for Disney. This film, The Marvels, is expected to come in around 5 million tickets less than where Quantumania, and that was just this past year. So as Quantumania opened up to $106 million, this film is projected to make maybe $50 million. According to Box Office Pro, this film could crater to as low as $35 million. Deadline says upwards of 60. Even if that is the case, you're, again, looking at not only the worst box office as far as the actual ticket sales are concerned, right? Again, 3.8 million tickets versus, again, the one flop that existed prior to the last couple of years for the MCU, which was the 7.7 million ticket opening for Incredible Hulk. Yeah, that is quite a discrepancy. Again, I'm at a 4 million ticket discrepancy there. Not looking good. Not looking good at all. Could not happen to a nicer company. Could not happen to a nicer person in that of Brie Larson. Again, comparing the tickets as well, as I mentioned, when you talk about the Incredible Hulk, $55 million was its opening weekend before you adjust for inflation. The actual, real value today would be around $79.7 million. You go ahead and compare that to Thor's, right? Thor had $65 million unadjusted, $90 million when you adjust, $74 million opening for the first Ant-Man film compared to the $57 million unadjusted. So no matter what you spin it, whether you're using the adjusted numbers or the unadjusted numbers, or whether you're just looking at the average ticket sales or the likely projected ticket sales, this film has no light whatsoever. There's nothing positive to say about right now the projections going in and going for this movie. So this, again, it's kind of incredible to see. We all knew, and we've all been following the MCU for a very long time. We've been following its downfall. We've been calling it out. We've been predicting a lot of the stuff that was going to happen. And it turns out, hey, finally it seems more and more of the woke, more and more rather of the normie audience has started to wake up either to the woke nonsense that's been shoved into these movies, or, and I think this might be a little bit more of the truth here as far as what's actually going on, I think that they finally woke up to the fact that the MCU, Marvel, Disney have just gotten lazy. I think that South Park episode is honestly going to be a lot more catastrophic than a lot of people might imagine. Not only did it skewer Disney, not only did it especially skewer someone like Kathleen Kennedy for Star Wars, I think it also kind of called out the MCU, because one of the key things that episode of South Park called out was the fact that everything is a multiverse now. Everything is based in this multiverse, but also what is the general principle that they are running by? Stick a girl in the role and make her gay, right? Just go ahead and do that. And that's kind of, again, that type of hyperbole that's being used, but it's also in so many ways true, right? Because that is what the MCU has been doing. And the biggest issue with all of it is the fact that franchises like the MCU, franchises like Star Wars are more, as far as the demographics are concerned, are a much higher male demographic. And so the fact that they've been trying to bring in and curtail a female audience and a female demographic that does not have nearly as much interest as that core demographic means that they're just pushing people away. Right, they're just pushing people away nonstop. And I also think that was probably the best thing, especially when it comes to the Marvels opening, is that I think this brings into the realization and brings into kind of focus here anyone who says that the first Captain Marvel film did well because people thought it was good and people were excited for Captain Marvel. I think that now has to completely go out the window, because you cannot justify that film was a massive success, made over $1 billion, and it was because of Carol Danvers, and it was because of Captain Marvel, the character, it was because of Brie Larson. You can't argue that now at this point, because ultimately, if that was true, if she was the draw, if people wanted to see Captain Marvel, if people wanted to see Carol Danvers, you would not be having the lowest opening in MCU history right now being projected. Some of the worst numbers could potentially also be the biggest flop for the MCU as well, because of how much money, $200+ million being sunk into this movie, and the film not expected to make that much money in the long run. So these are the numbers for this movie, and as I've been saying several times now, could not happen to couldn't happen to a nicer franchise or to a nicer studios. We also do have some other numbers, right? So Five Nights at Freddy's is apparently also going to stay in the mix, keeping that number 2 spot, or rather keeping the number 2 spot against the Taylor Swift Eras Tour, still hanging around. So again, Five Nights at Freddy's dropping another 60%. So clearly dropping off quite a bit, right? Had a pretty massive drop off last weekend, having another steep one this weekend. But the fact that the film is still making multiple millions of dollars every single weekend and is still making money throughout the week for a movie that had a day and date release model on Peacock, I think again continues to shove in the face all of the people in the media who are trying to argue in the previous years that other films failed only because and primarily because of the day and date model. Turns out, you know what, if you actually have a film that gives fans what they want, you actually can drive people out to go see it in your theater. And another big part of that too is, hey, if you actually make a movie where you're actually controlling the money and you're actually, being a little bit frugal in how you spend your money, turns out you can not only make your money back, you can also turn a profit in addition to that. Something that Disney and a lot of these other major corporations probably could learn quite a bit from at this point in time. Taylor Swift continuing to also hold quite strong after being out for several weeks. Expected to have another 49% drop and another $7 million. Kills the Flower Moon. Again, we could say, oh yeah, 27% drop, not all that bad. That's still only $5 million. That's still only bringing the total domestic to $60 million. We're still talking about a film that cost $200 million, needs to make $500 plus million to break even, and it's just nowhere near that. And based on the numbers that we're seeing right now, that's just not ultimately going to happen. So this is a film that I still need to see, but as you all know, it's hard to see a movie these days, and so it is a little bit trickier than usual. I'm going to try and see that movie. I'm going to try and also see The Marvels, even though I don't really want to. Gary is trying to make us watch that for FNT, and obviously I know that it would be something where it could drive traffic to the channel. But as you all know, I watch things when I can, and I try to watch and be honest with y'all about these films as they do come out. There is another film, Journey to Bethlehem, so another faith-based movie here from Sony Pictures and Affirm Films, so them working together for distribution. Expected to make around $4 million, so again, for the kind of movie that is, that's not too bad. Priscilla from A24 is still hanging out as well. It got its wide release last weekend, right when it got pushed out to more theaters. 29% hold there, so again, pretty good numbers for A24. That's kind of the standard for that, but they do have to make quite a bit more back in order to break even. Did cost a little bit more than the typical A24 release. The holdovers from Focus Features is getting a wider release, and so can't be surprised that the film is seeing a 305% increase. And again, it's because it was in barely any screens, and now it's being released in more. So that typically will happen. So again, pretty good per theater ratio there when you look at that fact. And then there are a bunch of other films being listed here, but those are the numbers as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts? And really the big story is, where do you think The Marvels is going to land? And again, they thought this film was going to get upwards of $80-85 million in its opening weekend domestic. That has cratered. That has basically Tony and Nance and the mainstream media have basically abandoned this movie as that being a possibility. It's not looking like the tickets are selling. It's not looking like that's going to be anything that's worth talking about. This is not having the same effect that the first film had, and the reason why is because, and again, we have to admit this as fact now, the only reason why the first film had any success, and I've been saying this for years now, was because of where it was positioned next to Endgame. Endgame, the biggest film in the MCU's history, right? Obviously was a long time coming. The buildup of many characters and storylines. I personally was not a big fan of Endgame, but I still acknowledge it for what it is, and it was a massive behemoth. You know what it was able to do too? It was able to carry on, right, with the month before the film came out, with the first Captain Marvel movie coming out. It came out at the right time as people were excited, prepared, wanting to see Endgame. People saw Captain Marvel. People were promoted. The film was promoted as being a movie that you needed to see in order to be ready for that final phase, that final film in that phase, right, of Endgame. And guess what? It worked, right? It worked. You were able to drive out a lot of people, get $1 billion. Turns out, though, not Carol Danvers. It ain't Brie Larson. It's no one attached to this project, because this is the kind of money you actually see from crap like this, and couldn't happen to nicer people. But those are the numbers as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts about this? Let me know in the comment section down below, and also let me know what you think the final opening weekend for the Marvels will be. Again, 140 worldwide sounds about right to me. Maybe 120 to 140 million for the domestic. I can see that hovering around $50 million, to be honest. I know some might try to, push that down and say they don't think it's going to make more than 20 or more than 35 million, but we have to also be honest with ourselves too, right? Ultimately, there are still going to be normies that go out and see this. There are still those people that they will watch anything MCU. They still do exist. I just don't think that you have nearly as many, and I think the number is kind of very clearly showcase that. You don't have those same numbers that are going to be able just to show up for anything, especially for a film that not only does not have Endgame and not only does not have a compelling character that people actually care about, but also has a bunch of characters from TV shows that no one actually watched. So a lot of reasons why, a lot of things going on as to why this film is set to be a massive flop. So let me know your thoughts. $50 million sounds about right to me. Domestic, 120 to 140. We'll have to wait with those numbers coming in. But let me know your predictions in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. Light up that fire button. Honestly, smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day and of your night. And as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members for the month of November, starting off with Father Luca Illich, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, the name Eagle Rider. Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. Matt317, check out his Twitch channel. Laura, the Mother Major General Story. Sorry, I didn't have enough spirit fingers there. Mr. Roy and ZK Man, who can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below. You get access to things like the giveaways channel, a podcast that I try to do every single month with a bunch of other awesome YouTubers, and a plethora of other content. So go ahead and check that out if you want more. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.